Hi everyone, I'm house sitting and I forgot my makeup, but there's a nice view, so that will have to compensate. I'll just wrap up what I read in the last half of May since I did an update video that covered the first half. I was going to read Orca by Jason M. Colby, and I finished that. It was the story of how orcas went from being a hated and feared species that multiple countries wanted to basically eradicate to being a loved but endangered species that people wanted to protect. At first, fishermen used to shoot orcas at will because they were considered a threat to salmon and other fish catches. Then they started to be captured and displayed. At first, this was somewhat positive because it showed the public that there were aspects of the species that should be appreciated. It allowed scientific study of orcas to move forward as never before because, originally it was the scientific study of orcas consisted of killing them and then studying their stomach contents. But then it moved to studying live orcas. But then the capture of orcas became a big business and it began to deplete the orca population. And scientists, trainers, and the public, as they studied them, began to realize the orcas didn't belong in captivities, especially as after orcas began to kill their trainers. Protests led to the capture of fewer whales and to the release of at least one whale. It was a good book. I didn't end up getting to a mental health book. Instead, I finished The Art of English Murder by Lucy Worsley and most of How to Be a Tutor by Ruth Goodman. The Art of the English Murder is a perfect book for reading late at night, or at least it was for me. It's a little bit spooky but lighthearted. Unfortunately, the audiobook of How to Be a Tutor left off the last section, so I might try to get the ebook at some point. Then I turned into a mood reader for the rest of the month. I listened to the Great Course's Great American Music Broadway musicals class. It covered everything from minstrel shows to Wicked. Then I read Tradition, the highly improbable, ultimately triumphant Broadway-to-Hollywood story of Fiddler on the Roof, the world's most beloved musical by Barbara Isenberg. It's the story of the making of Fiddler on the Roof, both the stage musical and the movie. For Summer of Sport, I had planned to read Faster, How a Jewish Driver, an American Heiress, and the Legendary Car Beat Hitler's Best by Neal Bascomb in June. I thought I'd start it in advance since June is looking pretty full, but I finished it. It was a really good story. Bascomb gives you lots of details on each character, car company, and government from each country, how they worked, how they interacted, all without bogging down the story. A strong American race car driver eventually builds her own racing team in France, with a Jewish man as the star driver. There is one major race where German cars are built for a different type of race. They were kind of very specifically built for one particular thing. But the French cars, this particular French car was built to be more versatile. It was built from, multiple types of races and also as kind of a street legal car. So, and the Jewish driver knew that he needed to win against Hitler. So he ended up winning that race. But then later on, he couldn't win in the races that the German cars were actually specifically built for. But he could win in this specific race. And it was important politically. And he ended up building a good life in America with his family. He ended up in the American Army, or it might have been the Navy, but he ended up in the American military during the war and then reconnected with his family after the war and built a good life with his family. They owned a restaurant and he became sort of a godfather figure to American race car drivers. And it seemed like out of all the drivers that were in this story, he ended up having the happiest, longest lived life. And I really liked that. I also finished 2 children's books that I had planned to read for June for Summer of Sport. And they were both by Nel Yomtov. And they were Defying Hitler, Jesse Owens' Olympic Triumph, and The Bambino. And they're both fictionalized accounts of important athletes. We have wind noise. I don't know how much you can hear it. Well, then Bill Rutenberg did a video about reading D-Day books for June, and the book he suggested wasn't available at my library, but Citizen Soldiers by Stephen E. Ambrose, the same author that he suggested, is. And it's not exclusively about D-Day, but it covers D-Day, so I read it on Sunday over Memorial Weekend, since my June is looking pretty full. And then finally, I finished the 7th and 8th books of in the Temeraire series by Naomi Novik, and I've started the last book. And I think that's everything. So thank you for watching. Have a good week. See you later.